Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, SaaS Security, Balancing Security Risk Management and Business Enablement, sponsored by DoControl. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Sean Henry, President of CrowdStrike Services, Christine Ray, Chief Information Security Officer at Uncork, and Adam Gavish, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of DoControl. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
Hi, thank you so much, Carol. Thank you so much, SANS Institute, to hosting us in this amazing webcast. We're very excited to be here and talk about a very upcoming and emerging topic, SaaS security. We have assembled a very simple slide for you with a few high-level topics, and we'll have a wonderful conversation. You should be excited about this domain because everybody uses SaaS application today to drive business, and it's very important to be aware of the risk within SaaS application, what you can do about it today, and moving forward, what needs to be done in this ecosystem. All right, we'll start with a series of intros. Go for it.
Oh, excuse me. You know what? Let's have you pull it up on full screen, please. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Sean Henry, President of CrowdStrike Services and the Chief Security Officer of CrowdStrike, and in that capacity overseeing our organization's professional services group as well as the security of our internal enterprise. I retired after 24 years at the FBI as Executive Assistant Director, so I've been in security for more than 30 years, cybersecurity for more than 20 years. Really happy to be here with this panel.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Christine Ray. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Uncork. We are a SaaS company, and obviously, if you've been paying attention to FinTech, we're making waves. I have worked across many of the different industry technology providers, Sun, SoftBank, IBM, and others. And I started out like everybody else, just working in computers, and organically moved into the security space as that area really started to solidify, and that's how I ended up in the security area. And so I'm really experienced in the baselines of where we are today and how we got here, and I understand the cloud probably better than most.
Awesome, amazing. So I'm Adam Gavish. I'm the co-founder and CEO at DoControl. We are a SaaS security vendor. I used to be a product manager at Google Cloud, launching the Gov Cloud solution, product manager at Amazon around the consumer payment ecosystem. Back in my past, I was a network security engineer and a software engineer. So to me, it's a very interesting journey coming up from the low-level network security and software engineering into the high-level business around product management, and now at DoControl. So here's a quick agenda for today. First of all, we're going to clarify why SaaS security, why now, why is it such an important and emerging category, what kind of risks are associated with SaaS applications. It's very important to first be aware of those. Then what can you do about it if you're even aware of those risks? And then how do you balance between the security over the business enablement across those SaaS applications? And of course, we will leave some time for anyone to ask any kind of question you may have along the way. So why SaaS security? First and foremost, very clear in terms of adoption and market maturity. SaaS are here to stay. They have been here for long enough for us to realize that every company in the world is using some kind of SaaS application today, from file sharing to CRMs to communication, productivity, dev tools, and whatnot. It's clear that everybody uses them. Now, when it comes to use cases, there are several high use cases that we can highlight right away. First and foremost, insider threats around employees stealing the company data before leaving the company. Users share with their own personal accounts, and then when they leave the company, they still have access to the company data. unauthorized access by former employees and vendors on moving forward, and everything around it publicly being forwarded to a third party, a fourth party, and others. Those are just a few high-level use cases. There are many more. And in terms of the impact, which we're going to discuss intensively in this webinar, SaaS data breaches are here. It's a real thing. It happens all the time to many companies. It causes reputational damage, revenue loss, and it generates a lot of engineering and operational effort and impact over time. So first, let's start off the conversation by talking about the risk associated with SaaS security. Sean, Christine, please, maybe you can give us some input from your perspective.
Thanks, Adam. I'll start, if I may, on really kind of the overall risk. And you've touched on some of the areas. I think whenever we talk about risk, it's really important to recognize and understand who the adversaries are that are looking to gain access to the data. And what we've seen just in the last couple of years, the number of actors that have become, that are very sophisticated, but have become much more aggressive in their posture, particularly with organizations that have moved to the remote workforce due to COVID, but going through their digital transformation, employees that are working from anywhere, they're using SaaS much more often, they're using different devices to gain access. And just some of those areas that you touched on really add a significant number of risk or amount of risk to the organization. Companies that don't often have full visibility into what data is being accessed, how it's being moved around, how it's being transferred, who has access within the organization. You know, when we see these adversaries that look to gain access, they're using assumed credentials. They're taking over valid credentials in the enterprise so that they gain access because of the incredible value of the data that's there. Corporations don't always have control over who can access their data. They don't have staff oftentimes with the right skill set to manage their data. With the ubiquity of SaaS applications, there's so many sometimes, it's just so difficult for companies to understand the policies and the processes for them to be managed effectively. And when you think about those adversaries that are targeting that data, for them, it is a windfall from a financial perspective. The organized crime groups that we've seen that have sold access to companies to others to gain access, and they're continuing their attacks because of the return on their investment. Small investment and a huge return from a financial perspective. So the risk has gone way up for companies when you think about things like GDPR and the financial implications, the sanctions that companies are faced with if they leak data, if data is exposed, if somebody leaves something open and it gets stolen, really substantial impact. So when you think about the C-suite and the board of directors, the risk has gone up and they need to work and focus on implementing the right capabilities to better protect themselves, better manage and better control the data so that they can limit liability to their brand, to their operations and financially. So really a great topic for us to be talking about today.
Absolutely. And if I could chime in here after Sean, he made some really great points on SaaS applications. And as representing Uncork, which is a SaaS company, we made a very strategic early decision that if we were going to ask our customers to trust SaaS security and SaaS architecture, then we wanted to put our money where our mouth was as well. And so we're a SaaS company that actually consumes all SaaS solutions. We actually have the smallest on-prem footprint that we possibly can have with hardware, and that's usually dictated by our building security more than anything else for the required hardware. But it's really important that companies think about just the saturation of SaaS applications across the ecosystems. Even if you are a company in the world doing business or services and you've chosen to not use cloud SaaS security, it doesn't mean that you aren't exposed. You still have employees and you have staff, you have vendors and you have partners, just like on this slide, and they are going to use SaaS solutions. And your employees and staff are going to use them in their personal life. And crossover, like you pointed out, between professional and home life has really become blurred with the pandemic. The pandemic sent a lot of people to work from home. They forced a lot of companies to rethink VPN and remote work strategies, security of their endpoints. And people got very, very flexible about how they share information and move it around. And it's not because it was people were trying to be malicious, and it usually isn't. Risk really comes from people just simply trying to do their everyday jobs, and the tools or the processes creating too much friction. And so they look for smaller and shorter solutions, and that's where the risk lies in SaaS. As your employees use their corporate emails to log into other solutions, they could be sharing passwords, they could be sharing credentials, they could be trusting across platforms that will create lateral risk for your company that you don't even know about if you think that you're safe simply because you don't consume a SaaS application within your business. That doesn't mean that your employees don't, and they haven't brought you risk anyway.
Valid point by both of you. Amazing input. I think to me, the most interesting thing here is that the differences between storing your data over a cloud infrastructure like AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or Microsoft Azure versus using quite a few, several SaaS applications. Those are very different use cases, because when you deploy your databases over a cloud infrastructure, you have full ownership. It's within your perimeter. You own the network security, you own the hardware security, A to Z. But when you deploy data over a SaaS application, it's really outside of your company perimeter, and you're completely dependent on each and every SaaS provider when it comes to any kind of security level, from authentication, from data protection, and so on. And so I feel like one of the risks here is that when you adopt several SaaS applications, you intentionally or unintentionally diversify your security program by leveraging very different security capabilities by each app, because they are very different and very uncorrelated, right? And so as a result, it's extremely hard to achieve a baseline of security capabilities across SaaS applications. And from what I understand, because of that, it generates more work for the security and IT teams, who now need to navigate each and every SaaS application security capabilities, find a sweet spot if there is such one, and then maintain it over time. Now, this is a risk because these people could have done more security or IT job on other aspects of security for your company, and there are many aspects as we may know. And so I feel like it's also a human resource risk as well, where we spend too much time on dealing with each and every application. From a supply chain perspective, I feel like, with all the data movement, think about all the third-party applications you install on those SaaS applications, who dump data between different apps in order to facilitate very good business workflows, but it's super hard to keep track of how data originated from point A and ended up being stored in point B, what happened in between, who's the ownership of that workflow, who enabled that, and what happened in between. It's just very hard to visualize.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, if you're trying to secure SaaS applications on a one-off status and one at a time, you will exhaust all of your resources, whether it is staffing or governance or risk or third-party risk management. You just, no two are the like. How they're used by different business teams, how they're implemented, and that's where a good information security program is really, really a core tenet that every company needs to have. And then also balancing that against your business risk appetite. So you need to understand how much risk your business is willing and can absorb in your market. You mentioned reputational risk, and that's huge. Sometimes with SaaS applications, again, if you're not a consumer directly, it doesn't mean that your staff's not, or your partners or your vendors aren't. And that reputational risk, like you said, with your supply chain, the SolarWinds is a very impromptu topic of the day right now that everybody's thinking about. And that's a really good highlight of how secure is secure? You know, we can vet these companies and their solutions, and you can take them through all the audits. You can look at all the evidence. You can put all kinds of controls and endpoint solutions like CrowdStrike does. But in the end, it's the data. It's the data and the people. And so when there's risk associated and you're looking at SaaS applications, you want to make sure that you understand what data you have, what your requirements are, either regulatory, compliance-wise, governance-wise, or business risk-wise, that you need to be concerned about. And then you need to bring the appropriate tools to the game. Is your data going to reside on your endpoints? Is your user's interaction at the endpoint an important piece? That's why tools like CrowdStrike and endpoint security continue to always be a critical components of SaaS application and data security and any information security program, because the human beings and the data are the most important piece, and that is what we really need to be most concerned with. I think in the SaaS space and in the cloud space, we've got some really good defined industry standards and industry best practices that everybody can pull pages from and they understand. But in the end, it's a business's workflow and services, the people and the data. And I think that's ultimately where you've got to start in order to do it correctly.
Awesome. Awesome. So we pretty much figured out what kind of risk associated with SaaS application. Now the question is, what do you do about it? So how do you mitigate security risk on SaaS applications? How do you go about that?
Well, I think first of all, it starts with visibility and understanding. You've got to know where the data is in order to protect it. Unfortunately, you can't rely on the SaaS applications themselves. You've really got to do things internally and secure it yourself and not rely on that provider. So visibility, allowing you to have an understanding of where the data is, how it's being transmitted, who has access to it, when they have access to it, etc., is critical. You've got to have the ability to do real-time detection of adversaries in the environment. I think that I mentioned monitoring, the key to understanding who's using the data, how long they have access to it, and logging all that data so that you've got the ability to track that. It's there with so many different SaaS applications in environments and companies that have dozens and dozens of different SaaS environments, that can become unwieldy and complex, trying to centralize those controls so that the people who are actually responsible from both not just a security perspective, but from a privacy perspective, in many cases, many organizations, those two areas of responsibility are joined together. In some places, they're not, they're separate. And they've got to be, that's an area I think that you've got to focus on.
I would agree. I think visibility and understanding the shared model in the SaaS space is really, really important. And that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot of SaaS providers and data center providers do a really good baseline of. And all SaaS providers and companies and businesses as a whole ought to think about that. So there's a shared responsibility matrix that we can all talk about. And we see it as that layer cake, and we're all familiar with layer 7 to layer 1, and it's not much different. There are things that the hosting provider, a CSP, is going to give you outside of the box based on the type of provider that you choose, whether that's an Amazon, a Rackspace, or a small mom and pop organization. You need to make sure that whatever services and program that they're offering you is going to meet your business security risk and needs at that layer. And then the next layer, are you bringing your own applications? Are you going to consume SaaS applications and bring them to that cloud? And then whose responsibility is it to do certain things? If you're bringing a SaaS application, it's transferring a lot of that technical responsibility for governance, compliance, and confidentiality to your SaaS vendor. But make sure that you're contracting also meets the requirements and puts that onus on your SaaS provider if it needs to be there. If it's your responsibility and you're consuming a SaaS service and your responsibility is the configuration and the compliance of the end product, then you need to make sure that your business policies, procedures, as well as your business team understands that that's their responsibility to continue to go through your internal best practices, your business SDLC checkouts, and how you want to make sure that your security is applied before you consume those SaaS resources or solutions, and then put a product out there to your consumers or whatever your target audience is. Because if you don't think about those things, they can really trip you up at the wrong time and leave your business exposed.
One area, and I agree with what you said there, Christine. One area that I don't know that either of us mentioned. I didn't hear the word, but it's here actually on this slide. It's automation, right? How do you press the easy button? Because when people have to do these things, if it becomes too manual, it doesn't scale very well. They might be have certain deadlines set, or they've got their own policies in place that they've got to adhere to, but it's got to be automated and try to take the human being out of it as much as possible to try and minimize that vulnerability footprint.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And I would say that, Sean, that's a really good point. A lot of customers from the automation standpoint, they want an easy button, but it's the forethought putting into your business strategy, your vendor and risk compliance, and understanding your risk appetite and what you need to protect from a data standpoint, either from a regulatory or just a good business practice standpoint, is where you start. And if you don't, then when you go to automate, you might automate more risk into your environment, or you might automate less risk opportunities out, which is great. Anytime that you can automate risk out of an environment, you want to adopt that.
Those are valid points. I feel like the way I see it, there are three aspects for the problem. The first thing is asset management. You can't protect the unknown. So you have to really catalog all your different SaaS users, assets, collaborators and external vendors consuming your data on a day-to-day basis. And from there, you'll be able to define some KPIs, some business metrics, because at the end of the day, just like every other security area, you need to report on it to the overall executive to help them understand how secure is the customer data, employee data, and company data, right? So by defining the right KPIs around SaaS security based on an ongoing asset management program, you'll be able to understand the exposure level across those different, players in the game. From there, and again, going back to my point from the what kind of risks are there, you're dealing with so many different SaaS applications. And so automating the way you define policies across those different applications is key to success. Because if you try to handle each of them separately, you will face a lot of blockers. Most of them don't even offer the same kind of policies in the first place. And so you would, again, going back to the same point about human resources, about being a very labor consuming problem, if you define to deal policies for each app, you would end up, overwhelming your security team over time. And so automation is the key to make sure that you achieve a really good baseline and around those KPIs and keep them consistent over time.
Yeah, and you have to make the solutions for your business easy to adopt and easy to use. And I think that really does lie in the automation space. When you're looking at SaaS applications, they can solve a small problem, but they can create a lot of complexity for either security or compliance or your technology team, which is trying to keep the lights on and keep those things talking to each other. So you should really be mindful when you're choosing SaaS solutions about what's your goal. What is it that you're trying to solve here? Like you mentioned, Adam, and Sean, I'm sure you've seen it, the more proliferation of SaaS connectivity that you have in your environment, the easier it is to lose sight of that visibility of what you have where. and how it moves. And so tools that provide visibility across platforms, across tools, I think are really critical. If you don't have tools, then you need to make sure that you've got a good cadence of clear communication and good deliverables to bring to communicate. And that can close that gap where automation not be there or technology isn't there. But I think business strategy wise, from a security standpoint, it really does come down to understanding what you need to protect and from what. Human beings are a huge factor. Choice, friction, those all cause people to seek shorter routes. And a lot of times those things have risk. The visibility of endpoint protection, the visibility of the right monitoring tools, and across cloud platforms or SaaS solutions is really critical. And there are not a lot of, there's a lot of tools out there, but not a lot of tools will see everything. So you have to choose well and group your tools of what you want to look at and how you want to look at it and respond to it well, because I think there's a lot of opportunity for too much information for security teams as well as executive and business teams. With the sky is falling, risk is everywhere, we can't do anything, and we need to be, I think, to the last point of this whole conversation, is more of enablers of listen to your business. What is it they want to do? Why are they looking for a SaaS application? What do they want to solve? Really listen, because every time that your business comes to you and asks for technology or a solution, they're not thinking about risk. They're thinking about solving something, or they're thinking about adding business to your portfolio, revenue streams, opportunities, business growth. All those things are important. Your security and your SaaS solutions should just enable that further. It should be business drivers to give your business wings. We want to be the red wing to everybody else, or I'm just not sure what the commercial is that gives you wings. But security needs to give the business wings. We need to be enabling the business with the security solutions that we bring them. We need to make them confident so that we can take endpoint solutions to any device, and we can make it more flexible. The pandemic, sending everybody work from home, caused everybody to worry about moving files in places and areas. There may be a lot of business data in a lot of spots that companies don't know and haven't thought about because people went work from home and they didn't have a laptop. They didn't have a VDI at first. So they used whatever they did. And how are we going to go back and clean that up? I don't think a lot of companies have thought about that. They're facing return to work. But as CISOs and security thought leaders, we always need to be 2 steps ahead. So you should already have your return to work plan and how you're going to manage that. But then what are you going to do post-pandemic return to work? What if we have to go into another one of these long-term DR scenarios? This was a BCP DR scenario that lasted over a year. I don't think we've had another cataclysmic event of this type that has caused this kind of a disruption in the industry for such a long period of time.
Awesome. Moving on to our next topic. Now, when we know the risk and we think we know how to mitigate, it's still not enough, because at the end of the day, like every other aspect of the company, we need to balance between security and business, because you can't do too much security and harm business enablement, and you definitely cannot do too little security. So you guys are doing security for more than 30 years, each of you. What do you think about that?
I always say security is a balance. You're never going to have 100% security with 100% effectiveness and efficiency. It doesn't work. Whenever you put security into an environment, you're going to impact operations, right? When we go through the airport, we've got to slow down, take our laptop out of our bag, take our shoes off. It's disruptive, but we accept that disruption because we understand what the risk is, right? This goes back, and we keep saying the word over and over again, but I think it's critically important when you're talking to executives, boards, the C-suite. They need to understand why we are implementing certain solutions that they see as an impact on the business, right? You're creating friction, you're causing people, it takes time away from their day-to-day duties, it slows them down. the risk piece, introducing that is critical. So airport analogy, I think everybody can see that. We understand what the risk to aviation is. Therefore, we'll put up with a 5-minute disruption if we're lucky going through that security checkpoint because it's necessary under the circumstances. When I think about this space and security in the organization, it's the same exact concept. I think a lot of these applications, and I said earlier that it's so important for us in cybersecurity to take the lead on securing the data in our environment and looking at how we secure SaaS and not rely solely on those vendors. Those capabilities were developed for their business process, and security is not always a top priority. It doesn't mean there aren't some companies that certainly are putting that forward as a differentiator for their technology, but it's not always the top priority or the first thing that they're considering. So when we get those folks to understand the risk, when we put these policies in place, when we put technology in place that allows us to better manage the applications and the data that sit on those applications, I think we're in a much stronger position to gain the support of the CIO, whose job is to distribute data, right? Get data through the organization to get to the needs of the business. The security side should not be seen as a drag, should not be seen as the enemy, but work collaboratively. And if everybody understands what the overall objectives are of the organization, they can work in a positive, collaborative way to create an effective work environment that people appreciate, that limits the impact on their ability to do their job day to day, but allows the organization to be most resilient. And I think that's what we all want, right? We want to be able to operate as effectively as possible with the least amount of drag. Sometimes that's more art than science. There's not always an algorithm that makes it work. It's us kind of give and take, testing and testing in the environment, different solutions, etc. But if you've got folks that have the right leadership style, the right ability to work in a cooperative environment, you're going to get to a place that's best suited for the success of the organization.
Yeah, I have got to echo Sean's sentiment there. Making sure that your workforce is educated and also feels also empowered to speak back and to give feedback to the security and technology sides of your house about what works well and what does not work well. And really listening to your workforce about what stands in their way and what you can do to get out of their way. We often will bring a security tool or solution into an environment because we have a compliance or regulatory need. But we also need to be open with our staff and our business at large and really understand what it is about these tools or these compliance pieces that we put in that get in the way of their everyday work. Sean was really on point with their business is about doing something else that makes them money, and security and technology are just means to an end for them to make business happen. And we need to make sure that those tools work effectively and they actually fit the needs of the people that need to use them. So if we don't bring them security tools, we need to be listening. So if you bring a tool and you're not sure if this is the perfect fit, make sure that you engage with your business stakeholders and say, okay, this is what we have and we think this is going to work, but you tell us. Make sure you give us feedback. What works and what doesn't work about this? Let's set up checkpoints to check in with you, like every 3 to 4 weeks, and really do a good job of doing some post-mortem evaluation of your tech to make sure that it's doing its job effectively and that people like to use it. Adoption is one of the biggest things. If you can remove that friction and get people to want to use the tools because they enable their business to do it faster and better, then they're going to work more securely across the thing. And when they understand the risk, they make more thoughtful decisions about how they try to get things done.
I feel like, one of the key things here is that we need to understand what goals every persona in the organization have and how we use security as an enabler for that goal. So for example, salespeople need to get deals done, right? So
Yes.
every additional friction for these people, like installing an agent, installing a Chrome extension or whatever, any additional software they need to learn, maintain, use every day just to do their job would most likely prevent them from, from providing the best in class performance they can do for the company, right? But on the flip side, the scope is, subject to significant data exposure because they
Well, that's
collaborate
where
with
the
customers.
automation piece really comes in, Adam. And I think that your solution from DoControl is a really good example of that. That user experience, and as a SaaS provider, one of the things that Uncork is really proud of is that user experience that we can bring our customers. And the more fluid you can make that experience and that interaction to utilize and maintain policy is a really important aspect. And there are other tools, whether it is an endpoint security tool, if it's an online SaaS tool, if it's a third-party authenticator for MFA, the better that interaction is with the individual end user, the more likely they are to just use it. If you can give them extensions, enable them to use their personal devices for their MFA, leverage all of the tools that are available in technology, whether it's CASB or if it's SSO or SAML, you want to make those interactions to be secure, to do things appropriately, and to do things within your stated parameters of business enablement with security and within risk, are things that feel natural for your staff to use, because if they don't, they're just not going to, because it's friction. They have to go somewhere else, do something else versus their natural flow of business. So you need to think about that when you're choosing your SaaS providers, choosing your tools as well, but really do that post-mortem. After you choose solutions and put them in, go back and ask what works, what doesn't work. Really listen, lean in a little bit and understand why they feel they can't use something, because that kind of feedback is super valuable to business risk management in the end, because risk management
back,
is the beginning what they won't do.
And this goes back to the point about, not being able to leverage SaaS native security at scale, because at the end of the day, they don't offer much. They don't offer, you can, for example, you can either enable public sharing or disable it. There's no in between. But in reality, you gotta use context to understand who
Yes.
needs what and when. Like some organization units actually need to drive business much, much faster than others. And other business units, they need to be more restricted because by nature, they deal with the company revenue or forecasting or whatever, right? So there gotta be a solution that use context in order to restrict or loosen some of the security policies based on the persona doing the job.
Well, right. And to that end, that's where a lot of companies implement exception or acceleration projects and little incubators where they can do things a little bit faster, and they have a different risk appetite associated with them. And really, sometimes for a company, it might just be understanding what business units have that kind of risk appetite versus other business units, and making sure that you implement the right policies, process, and technology tools from a security perspective to better enable them. So you might want to be able to bring a fast-moving accelerator group a little bit more SaaS type of technology and enablement, but put guardrails around it that say, okay, you can do these things, but only with this type of data and in this type of ecosystem, it's perfectly okay to move fast and loose. And then over here, making sure your company understands this is the most prized possession we have. This is what's got to be protected. And this is the only thing you got to spend an extra 5 minutes about. Guess what? Your team will do that. And when they understand that this is the spot that they've got to spend that extra 10 or 15 minutes, then this bout of friction doesn't feel like an onus thing for them to do. And I think that's where endpoint protection tools, extensions with CASB and SSO and SAML, really rethinking security monitoring from the whole ecosystem of inside and outside of your network is a really different vision direction that security is going. And SaaS security could really do a lot for business enablement in ways that they haven't really thought about. And hopefully we'll see more work in that space now that everyone has had an opportunity to test it out with the pandemic shutdown.
Yep. One quick question to you, Sean. At the end of the day, it's one thing to decide on a security measure in your organization. It's another thing to actually communicate it and apply it within all of the different organizational units, especially with executives. How should communication be done in order to facilitate this kind of security improvement in a balanced way?
Well, I think we've bounced around on that topic quite a bit here as it relates to risk. I'm a big believer in centralization of security. And when I say that, I'm thinking about large organizations, multinational organizations. I've worked with companies that have operations in dozens of countries on multiple continents, and they've got a European leader, an African leader, an Asian leader, and each of those organizations are running their own operations. And when I've talked to the global CISO about why are you not implementing this across the enterprise, it's because these other organizations are running autonomously. And I'm shocked when I see it. Maybe there's a business reason that I'm not getting my head wrapped around, but I don't see it. I think that it's so important to have that centralized command so that you have the things that we've talked about here today: the visibility, the understanding of risk, the ability to act effectively, quickly. When there's a security incident, you don't have hours or days sometimes to kind of think through the process. You've got to be able to react quickly, expeditiously, to stop and mitigate the impact of some of these significant operations, things like ransomware, where we're seeing adversaries using cloud-enabled technology to launch ransomware, which is devastating, catastrophic for companies. So that's one of the areas, that centralization. Again, that piece of, if you have that centralization, you've got a better understanding of the ecosystem and the enterprise. You've got somebody, hopefully, if they've got that level of authority across the entire organization, that they're higher positioned in the company. Maybe they're in the C-suite. I'm also a believer that whoever oversees security writ large for the entire company should be in that cabinet level position, along with the CFO, the general counsel, the CMO, the CSO, overseeing all security, should have a say. If they're in that position, they've got the visibility, I would imagine or hope that they would have the confidence of the team to implement things swiftly and quickly, because this is not something that needs to be sat around and debated about indefinitely. It really requires that quick response. So that's where I would start, Adam.
Awesome. And we talked quite a bit on the executive side of things, but I think we also need to talk about the end user, because at the end of the day, those are the people who drive their business every day, and for them, limiting their work is not a good thing to do. However, in some cases, you actually need the end user context to understand the security situation. For example, why did you share this file and that file to that external vendor? That's something that involves a lot of friction today and a lot of tension, because security team have to investigate on behalf of the end user, and in many cases also reach out proactively to the end user to get more details. Now, I feel like there's an opportunity to automate some of the stuff. There shouldn't be a human-to-human interaction at that level, because it adds a lot of tension to the organization. Security people, in many cases, they're being perceived as the bad guys, while in fact they're pretty much the superheroes trying to save the organization from having a breach. And second of all, it's extremely labor consuming. And so having the kind of automation between the user themselves and the security program will most likely help to raise awareness on security issues and facilitate education, helping end user understand what's wrong versus what's okay over time. Does it make sense?
Yep. No, I agree completely. I want to take the human out of this space if we can. We have the ability to do that, because human to human does not scale. It's not expeditious enough, and it's a flawed strategy long term. I agree. Being able to engage in why certain things were shared, how they were shared, et cetera. But from that point forward, you should be able to completely automate that process.
All right, awesome. So we talked a lot about how to balance. We have some time for Q&A. Carol, if you want to take over.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. The first one asks, how do you see the SaaS security market evolving in the next few years?
Interesting question. So I feel like now it's a very good timing. You know, this category has just started to boom and emerge out of nowhere. You know, sure, there were CASB solutions in the past that provided some of those capabilities, but also many more capabilities like DLP and endpoint security and whatnot. Now we started to see a lot of vendors focus specifically on SaaS security because it's important, because it matters, because it prevents data breaches. I think moving forward, we will see more SaaS security vendors focusing on data protection versus cost optimization or shared IT, which are very valuable, but at the end of the day, you need to prevent unauthorized access to your data. And so that's something I think we will start seeing more and more in this category.
I would agree. I think the cloud SaaS security space is going to be an explosive growth area. More and more companies were forced to rethink and adopt cloud solutions as the pandemic shutdown really hit a lot of different businesses, closed brick and mortar stores, and people stayed home. They looked for electronic and digital means and solutions in order to rebrand, reach audiences, bring services into people's homes in different ways. And with that technology comes risk. And I think a lot of businesses are they rush to put things in so they could enable their business to survive, which is absolutely should be their first priority. But now that they've had that and they've reached that point where things are starting to work, now they're starting to relook at, okay, so we've got this enabled, we've got our business running again, and it's changed. Now they have to go back and redo their business risk analysis. And that risk analysis is going to drive the want, the need, and the desire for more security tools. And as more cloud SaaS solutions become things and more providers enter the space, the security and the solutions are always going to evolve. So it's just a new area of growth, but we're transitioning from traditional brick and mortar stores and traditional IT systems to more cloud adoption across all the business sectors, which I think is good. People should be focused on what they do to make money for their business, not about whether or not they want to be technology experts and security experts.
Awesome.
All right, thanks. Are there specific SaaS apps that matter more than others?
Can you please repeat the question?
More, is it which kind of SaaS apps matter more?
I think so.
Okay. Well, first of all SaaS apps matter, in my opinion, but I feel like, you know, we talk with customers that have 500 and plus applications, but at the end of the day, the majority of the risk is within maybe 8 or 9 or 10 apps. And we're talking about the apps that everybody in the organization use to drive business, from file sharing on Google Drive, Microsoft SharePoint and Box, to productivity with Slack and Teams, to communication, to your CRM, Salesforce, to support ticketing, or your dev tools like GitHub and Snowflake and Looker. So it's pretty much all over the place, different apps used by different people in the organization, but the common thing between them is that everybody uses them every day. It's a very, very common use case for each of them, so they all matter.
I would say that yes, Adam's 100% spot on. And if you think about it, everything SaaS related has an identity. And the moment that it has an identity, it has permissions to something. And the biggest risk is leak, and it's read access. A lot of these SaaS apps we get a little bit complacent with because we give them read access to infrastructure systems and identity management. And that's all they need is a crack in the door to get in.
I'll add a little bit of a different twist, but along the same lines. They're all important if they're supporting your business and they're making your business better. When they're not that important to you, that's when you actually need to get rid of them, right? Let's not keep potential vulnerabilities in place if they're not bringing value to your business. That's just a recipe for disaster, and it increases the target space unnecessarily. So
Oh yeah.
which ones are the most important? The ones that you're actually using every day for and you have a business purpose for. And when that stops becoming useful, get rid of it.
I would agree. I think usage and adoption are really, really important, and making sure that you go back and you've got a regular cadence to do the housekeeping. Make sure your list of cloud SaaS applications is complete. Make sure that you know everything that's in your environment that people are touching. If you don't, then there's risk you don't know about. And that's super important to make sure that you always are going to do the housekeeping on.
I think we found a new SOC 2 type 2 control. I hope not.
You want more?
No.
Yeah, we don't.
We had enough of it.
We might be the only security experts that go, no, it's okay, we've got enough.
All right, thank you all. The next one asks, what will be the most important risk related to using AI and machine learning in security solutions?
Sean, we want to go about that first?
Sounds like a trick question. I mean, when I think about AI and ML, I think about it from an adversary perspective and how they harness those capabilities to further automate their attack patterns. I always say that whenever we see an attack, there's always a human being that's involved in the process. There's a human being on the other end of the wire. It's not just the ones and the zeros, but it's somebody who's got clear collection requirements, and they've set out to harness that data from your environment. And when I think about AI and ML, I think about that becoming much more automated, and the challenges that puts in place for security teams, because the ability to scale becomes that much more important. The speed and the visibility becomes that much more important. We're certainly using AI and ML on the security side to be able to hunt for a needle in a stack of needles, the one that's just a little bent. And an adversary, the implications on the backside, looking at how adversaries continue to automate is a significant risk going forward. So it's going to require, from the cybersecurity perspective, much greater automation and much greater implementation of those technologies to try and stay ahead.
I think go ahead.
We can't lose sight of the fact that for every tool that we put in to be a blocker, those things are also the same tools that the bad guys are going to use to break in. AI and machine learning can be used for good, and they could be used for bad. We're all familiar with the idea and concept of rainbow tables. I mean, that's really simple. We're taking a whole bunch of things, we're throwing it in a table, every possible permutation is there, and we used to just scan across it and try it. That's a brute force attack. Everybody knows what that is. And guess what? We all got smarter. So did the bad guys. So we have to, all these tools, AI, machine learning, the difference between it being protection and an adversary tool is simply who's wielding it. So we've got to think about that in the grand ecosystem. And I think Sean's making a good point. As things become automated, especially on the hacker space, it makes it harder for us to detect it. We're looking for the bent straw and pin. We're looking at that 1,000,000-foot view of all of these things, and do they have something in common? And if they do, what is it? Because we need to understand that. But those are also the same tools that are being used by the bad guys, especially state-sponsored hackers, state-sponsored criminal activities. They're not about getting in and making a splash. The hackers that want to make a splash are the easy adversaries for us to pick out, because they leave breadcrumbs and they like to brag. It's the state-sponsored hackers that want to get in and just listen that are the most risk. They're the most risk to our governments. They're the most risk to our business. Information and insider knowledge is the key to making money illegally. And if we don't understand that, then we're not going to be able to secure our business. So you need to know what's the most risk for your business, but you also need to know that what you don't know can be the most risk that you have.
I feel like from my perspective, AI is a great technology used for decision making in order to improve your product and help your customer navigate through your product. And that's why, data integrity, I think, is the #1 risk there, because you have to make sure the data used to train your model is coming from the right origin, right? Because if somebody is able to inject a different kind of data set, it will change the decision you make in your product, probably for the worse.
True, and I do worry about AI and ML over analyzing risk as well, and weighting too much risk to something because it doesn't see it in a total context. A lot of those weighting systems don't, and that's why we have governance models and things like that that bring other aspects of data knowledge together and referential views, and those are really integral. But AI and machine learning, it's really cool, but it's also a little bit scary, because for everything that we're going to use it for good, somebody could also use it against us.
All right, thank you. The next one says, are any of you worried about ransomware as a service spreading, I think is what they meant, spreading to attack SaaS assets in the cloud as opposed to attacking physical assets?
We've already seen it, right? We've already seen adversaries that are doing that, in more than 80% of the criminal investigations we were involved in this past year, there was probably 300 or 400 that we saw. More than 80% were ransomware specific. So when you consider the role of the SaaS provider as a potential access point to the organization's data and processes, and different types of ransomware that's emphasizing that attack mode, it is going to create larger implications for companies. For so many years, and a lot of what we talked about today was exfiltration of data. How do adversaries get data that's been leaked or been mismanaged or misconfigured? They have access. They are able to exfiltrate data from an environment. But now these disruptive attacks, like ransomware, that are shutting organizations down because they cannot run their operations, they can't talk to their customers, they can't utilize their manufacturing processes. That's where the risk I talked about earlier comes in significantly, because instead of, we lost 25,000 usernames and passwords, or we lost 100,000 credit card numbers, now we've lost access to our corporate assets for 3 weeks, and that takes $1 million breach and turns it into a $50 million impact, or a $100 million impact, and that is going to continue going forward because it's successful.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so desirable for the criminal element. We've got to disabuse ourselves of the idea that hackers are out there just for the glory or a moment of fame. It's a business. It's all about making money. It's either making money by stealing information or holding it for ransom. Simple as that. And if there's a model to make money, then criminal elements will do it. And you really do need to understand that risk and be able to recover from a ransomware attack. And yeah, it's so easy to monetize these types of attacks, and they can put people out of business.
I feel like ransomware is such a shame, because at the end of the day, it's okay to share data and keep it open. It's not okay to let it be open over time, right? What you don't use, keep it closed. Least privilege model is a real thing. It's a really good framework to help organizations just minimize the risk, minimize the attack surface, make sure that no unnecessary data point is exposed externally or even publicly, to prevent this ransomware attacks. Especially when it comes to your critical assets over Salesforce or OneDrive, where it's your company data, it's your most valuable asset. You should pay attention and make sure nobody should access it over time.
there's also new contract clauses that we're seeing in contracts where if something impacts the data or the service for a set period of time, we have to give credit back to companies as well. So there's a lot of things to think about in that space, and how much, that mean tolerable downtime. We've always thought about it in the small ecosystems of an app or access to something, but ransomware changes that, because that's your whole business. That's everything. And it could be completely unrecoverable if you haven't done your homework.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Sean, Christine, and Adam, for your great presentation, and to DoControl for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.